This is the beginner's guide to accounts payable, 10 important items to check when entering AP. Unlike many accounting tasks that can be easily fixed with a journal entry, an AP mistake could mean actual money lost. Deadlines missed, fees incurred, invoices lost, and incorrect vendors paid are all very real possibilities. That is why I've put together this list of 10 important items to check anytime you're entering accounts payable invoices. Let's dive right in. Number 1, always make sure to use the actual invoice date, regardless of when you receive or enter the invoice. If terms are set in your system, the invoice date will be used to calculate the due date. So net 15 would equal 15 days after the invoice date the invoice is due. Plus, you want to have accurate information in your system. So no matter when you get it, enter the date on the invoice as the invoice date. Number 2, due date. The due date is super important in your system because you will likely run an aging report to determine which invoices should be paid. The aging report shows you what is due, or how far past due the invoices are, at a certain date. If you get an invoice that was due 2 months ago, make sure to enter the due date as 2 months ago so that on your aging report, it will show that that invoice needs to be paid stat. Number 3, accounting period date. The accounting date is when an invoice will actually show up on the financial statements. So if it's the first of the month and you get an invoice for the previous month, you probably want to use the previous month as the accounting date, if AP is still open for that month. If AP is closed, the accountant will need to make an accrual for that invoice, and you should enter it using this month as the accounting period. Also note, don't use a future date as the accounting period. Number 4, invoice number. The invoice number is used in your system to make sure you don't enter the same invoice twice, so this is very important. Nobody wants to double pay. Most systems will give you a warning if you enter the same invoice number twice. The problem is sometimes there is no invoice number. In that case, enter the invoice date, but decide the format that you'll use and be consistent. For instance, year, month, day. Number 5, account number. Account number refers to the account number you have with a specific vendor. This is crucial to make sure that the invoice is being entered under the correct vendor. Like if you have multiple AT&T accounts, they'll all have different account numbers. Also, some vendors require the account number to be printed on the check. Even if it's not required, it may help your vendor apply the payment correctly. So make sure it's on the check anytime that you can. Number 6, default GL code. Most accounting systems allow you to set a default GL code for the vendor. That means every time you create an invoice for that specific vendor, the invoice is automatically coded to a specific account in your chart of accounts. Anytime you have vendors that are always coded to the same place, like electricity, default GL codes will save you a lot of time and increase your accuracy. Number 7, default terms. Some accounting systems also let you set default terms for each vendor. This means that if a vendor's invoice is always due 10 days after the invoice date, you can set that term, and when you enter an invoice date, it'll calculate the due date for you. Sometimes hotels also set terms across the board and disregard the due date on the invoice altogether. So make sure to check with your company policy. Number 8, remittance address. Some vendors have different shipping and remittance addresses. Make sure the address that's entered into your AP system is the remittance address. That's where they want to receive payments. Sometimes the payment will get there either way, but it may end up being late if you don't use the address that they want you to, or it could not get there at all. Number 9, current charges. Sometimes invoices will show a total due that includes balances from previous invoices. You may already have those entered into your system. Make sure to only enter the total current charges on that specific invoice to avoid duplicating charges. Research other balances to make sure they're accounted for. If you don't have those invoices, you may need to call the vendor. But there's a good chance it's just a timing issue. They mailed the new invoice before receiving your payment for that previous invoice. Number 10, statements. Statements are not the same as an invoice. Only invoices should be entered into your AP system. Vendors may additionally send you statements that show all of the invoices owed to them. If you enter invoices as they come in and also enter the total on the statement, then you'll duplicate all of those charges. If you don't have the invoice that's listed on the statement, call the vendor and ask them to send you the actual invoice. Don't use the statement. All right, number 11, this is kind of a bonus one, prepaid codes. If you receive an invoice that's for a service you'll use later, then you should code it to prepaid. One example is if you need to pay next month's rent at the end of this month. You need to use this month as the accounting period and code it to prepaid. Then in the description, make sure to include where you want it expensed and when. So October rent expense, for example. It may also be a service that covers multiple months. Then your description might be something like expense to rooms contract services, January through June. And then the accountant can make those entries when they're creating the financial statements. Those are 10 important items to check anytime you're entering accounts payable invoices. One final tip is to not get distracted while entering AP. You may get on a roll and start to zone out a bit. This can be really dangerous. Accounts payable is very detailed work, and all of the items mentioned above are important and serve a very specific purpose. But don't worry, if you stay mindful and pay attention to the items above, you will do great. All right, thanks for watching. Have a great day.